everyone. This is Anna Pacheco with Santa Fe 101, your guide for real estate in Santa Fe, New Mexico. Today I have a real treat. I have a Santa Fe local, David Barker. We actually went to high school together, and David has his own firm, Barker Realty, and he's got a lot of serious history here. David, do I have your permission to record this interview?
Yes, please, go ahead.
So we were just talking before I hit the record button. Tell me a little bit. You have fascinating history here. I've interviewed your parents before they passed on. I rave about your grandmother, Ruth Laughlin, who wrote The Wind Leaves No Shadow. So tell us a little bit about your deep history, rich history before we go into real estate. How's that?
Okay. Well, I think I want to start off with something that you were first referencing, the days of high school back in the early 1970s. And I remember with affection, Papa Joe Casados, our beloved principal. What a great guy he was. He was kind and gentle. And I remember a couple instances where he really helped me out. So.
And do you remember, since we're talking about the old days, remember Bouncer Senna?
Oh, yes. Yes.
Yeah, there's another. So you also would have gone in the ninth grade to mid-high, which is currently our city hall. Is that correct?
Yes.
Because that back then they hadn't finished completing Santa Fe High on Siringo Road, so all the ninth graders all had to go downtown. That was a great experience. I really liked it.
That was wonderful fun. And before that, I was at Lee Harvey next door. So that was back in the day. You know, it was interesting when my parents moved back to Santa Fe in the early 60s. They told their friends that they were interested in living downtown. And a lot of their friends said, "Oh, that's a terrible neighborhood. You shouldn't live there. Go buy a house out in the suburbs. You know, there's this new place out of town called Soli Lomas." So eventually they ended up buying a house on Palace Avenue, which was perfect because we could just walk downtown, walk to all of our schools. And it was a wonderful experience growing up. And of course, that has all changed now.
Well, you remember then, because College Street is now Santa Fe, old Santa Fe Trail, but I mean, I still refer to it as College Street because the San Miguel College was on that street. So it was right around the late 60s or 70s I guess the realtor decided to change it because that was the original route of the Santa Fe Trail, but I still know it as College Street. So those are the good old days. Santa Fe, definitely. I mean, it's that Santa Fe is gone, but weren't we lucky to have grown up in Santa Fe? Because what a special time in our history.
Indeed. And the Frito pies at Woolworths on the Plaza, that was a great spot to escape to.
I remember I used to ditch school a lot at mid-high, and it was cold in the winter, so we started going to funerals at the cathedral just to stay warm. And I remember one time it was Bouncer Senna or somebody was at the funeral, and he's like, you don't belong here. So we kind of got busted. But let's talk just for again. Tell me just a little bit. I know your great-grandfather or great-great-grandfather was an important judge in Santa Fe.
So he arrived by horseback from Texas in the 1880s. The story that's gone down through the generations was that he was headed on his way to Colorado, and he had been trained as an attorney, specializing in real estate and the history of land and mineral rights. So he was headed to Colorado, but ran out of money in Cerrillos, New Mexico, sold his horse, hiked into Santa Fe, rather liked it. So he set up a little legal shop back then, got himself established, went back to Texas, Fort Worth, Dallas area to pick up his bride, Catherine, and then came back to Santa Fe, got married, and they had two daughters. Ruth Laughlin was my grandmother, and she's the one who you referenced, who was the author who wrote The Wind Leaves No Shadows, about early life and personal vignettes about what Santa Fe was like back in the day. So he subsequently, that was N.B. Laughlin, he became a judge with the Supreme Court when New Mexico was a territory before we gained statehood in 1912. So sometimes I flip across back through some of the court cases and read some of the cases that he wrote about. There was an interesting time back then. At one point, I don't know which caused this, but I think he got the nickname from somebody as the hanging judge, and I'm sure that was because at one point he had to sentence somebody to that, which is
it was really the wild west then, for sure.
It clearly was the Wild West, yes. And then my grandmother Ruth, she grew up. She had a house on De Vargas Street, right at the corner of Don Gaspar and De Vargas. And that was later on requisitioned by the state, who bought it because they needed to buy additional property around there for an expansion of the state capitol complex. But there are stories. She used to have a monkey that lived there, that would jump up on the wall and kind of tease the school children as they were walking up and down the street. So there are lots of old fun stories about early life in Santa Fe.
Well, I think what's interesting, what you just said now, is that the gentleman that ran out of money, your great great grandfather, he was somehow already tied into real estate.
Well, his legal profession had him in real estate.
Well, that's what I'm saying. So there was a connection, sort of.
Correct. And the New Mexican has that wonderful column that I look at every day that talks about 100 years ago today in Santa Fe. And I remember seeing his name in there. I think it was 2007. And the report was that Judge Laughlin had just bought the property on the corner of San Francisco Street and Don Gaspar, and paid a very large sum of $7,000 for that block of buildings there. So me being a numbers guy, had to pull out the calculator to sort of compare what I think the return on that real estate has been. I think he would have done just as well if he'd put it in the stock market and not have any management headaches or worries about it. But a little interesting history, and we're fortunate that the family has been able to keep that real estate. So we still have the property downtown that he bought back in 1907.
And so Barker Realty was started by your father, is that correct?
It was started by Laughlin, my father, back in the late 1960s. He returned to Santa Fe in 63 with 6 children, and a 22-year Navy career behind him. Got established as a real estate appraiser, and subsequently got involved in sales of real estate, commercial and residential. And back in the 60s, Santa Fe was a quiet town. It didn't have the popularity that it does now.
Oh, for sure.
And I remember he had to get special permission to build a portal in downtown Santa Fe. At the time, the only portal in downtown was at the Palace of the Governors. So I think he built the first portal, and that rapidly caught favor. So a lot of other property owners subsequently started adding portals in front of their properties.
And well, you were saying how different it is. I always tell people it was like Podunkville growing up here. You remember, it was like we would get movies like 6 months after the rest of the country had seen them. I mean, this was a small, it definitely wasn't the hip town that it is today. I remember as a kid, the Guarantee, which was a shop owned by the Silvers,
Yes.
clothing shop, they had an elevator. And so for excitement, we would go ride the elevator in their shop. It was like 1 floor up, or the hospital was just up the street, St.
Yes.
Vincent Hospital. We would go ride the elevator. That's what a small town Santa Fe was growing up here. When did you join Barker Realty?
So I graduated from high school in 74, went to Colorado College, and came directly back from Colorado College in 1978. And joined my father at Barker Realty then. So that's when I joined up, and my father decided in the mid 80s, in 1985, he decided he wanted to exit the residential business. And that's when Lisa and I bought Barker Realty and started to focus all of our attention and energy in that direction.
How big is Barker Realty now? How many agents do you have?
Well, it's interesting, the involvement of the real estate industry nationally as well as locally. Currently, Barker Realty has about 75 brokers. So we've grown a bit.
So Barker Realty, Varela Real Estate, are you the only 2 local real estate firms here, or are there others?
Well,
like family run for like over 50 years type thing.
I think I'm trying to think of who else there is. Of course, Wally Sargent had his business for the longest time. And Frank Gomez was
well, that's Varela.
Grandfather. He had his business. Of course, there was Reyes Padilla, Karen Walker for the longest time. So there's a nice old guard that was there. They used to have their MLS meetings over coffee at the La Posada Hotel before MLS actually existed. They had some sort of informal cooperative arrangement where they would share select listings and information. So I think our company has just grown steadily through the time. We are the biggest that we have been right now. And of course, now we're just focused on how we can all be just as effective working remotely in this challenging time. But Santa Fe is a popular spot. A lot of people still coming into Santa Fe.
And I know recently, maybe in the last month, that Santa Fe, the median cost of a house is now over $500,000.
Isn't that crazy?
Tell me about, I'm saying tell me about it, but I mean, tell me about it. Tell me what you think, about that. How can people
Well,
come here anymore?
I have concerns about the pressures of very strong demand and low inventory and what that means for our community. I think it is driving the pricing up throughout the market. So that is great when you're a seller, but it puts a lot of pressure, especially if we don't get some relief. I don't see currently any slacking of demand. I think we're going to continue to have more people wanting to move into Santa Fe. One of the exciting things that I see is that Santa Fe is now starting to attract younger couples with children. Now that people are a little more mobile and they can work from their computer and companies are allowing that, we're seeing the advent of new younger couples coming into Santa Fe. So I think that bodes very well for the community.
Well, that's a vibrant community when you have Little League and schools, and we certainly need that. We've been known for, I guess, probably the last 50 years as a retirement community, but isn't it wonderful that I'm seeing young people around my area, walking on the trails and doing different things. So I think it is wonderful that people can work remotely, and we are seeing younger people working here. In terms of the cost of housing, are you selling outside of, do you and your agents do the entire Santa Fe County, or do you focus in on the city itself? Or tell me a little bit about that.
Well, we focus on the marketplace, which is predominantly Santa Fe County, but yes, occasionally we reach further out. We have sold properties up in Taos and down in Socorro, and an occasional ranch property, but predominantly within Santa Fe County. And there it's predominantly residential. We do a little bit of commercial real estate, but mostly it's a residential market for us.
And I guess here in Santa Fe, the town is growing southward, so that's where you can they're building newer houses. And are you seeing more of a demand in areas, that the older neighborhoods or the newer neighborhoods, or just everybody wants to live in Santa Fe, they don't care where?
I think it's consistent with your latter statement, because we have such low inventory, and that's a challenge. Buyers are now looking in places where 5 years ago we would have not seen nearly as much interest. Rural areas, which always follow behind the Santa Fe marketplace, are very popular. And it used to be that when you went southeast of town, the market would really start to drop off in terms of activity. But nowadays, it doesn't matter where the property is located, and it almost doesn't matter what the price range is. The market is very strong. It's hard to find anything less than $350,000, which I find shocking and appalling. Of course, real estate is much more affordable because interest rates are so low. I remember the first house that I bought, I think that was back in the early 80s. I think I signed a mortgage at 13.5% interest. And that is shocking today. But of course, the price of housing was so much less back then that one could afford to pay that interest rate.
And in terms of like outside of the Santa Fe area, does Barker work with like do you sell lots and kind of coordinate builders, or are you focusing more just on people that have a house to sell that's ready to go?
I think I would say that we work on all aspects. It is based on what is the client's need and what does the client have. So we have worked with developers, we have worked with land subdivisions, but by and large, it is a resale market for us, residential and vacant land.
And when people come in here, they don't know the first thing. Do you ever talk to them about the pros and cons of it seems like everybody that comes to Santa Fe wants to live in an adobe house on a dirt road, which is kind of funny because in the old days, an adobe house was poor man's housing. You'd make your own mud bricks and you'd build your house.
Right.
it's time as your family grew you to add on, and dirt road. So, but the irony is here in Santa Fe, those are the most expensive homes right now, mud houses on dirt roads. So what do you tell people about that?
Selling for millions of dollars. Isn't that
Right?
interesting? Um, you know what? One of the things that has changed in our market is, yes, people used to prefer having the dirt road, but now over the last 10 years, we're starting to see that change where everybody wants to be on a clean paved road. I suppose that's because the cars have become a little bit fancier than what we're used to when we grew up. I don't remember seeing very many luxurious cars growing up in Santa Fe driving around. Sure, the occasional sports car, but nowadays with what you see, a lot of people really prefer to have a paved driveway access. But they like the hidden, they like the out of the way, and of course there's the debate about whether somebody wants to be closer into town, maybe on the historic east side or South Capitol, versus being in the foothills where they have the view. And those are just two different experiences.
Well, I've had friends who like have moved out to El Dorado, which is about what, 8 or 10 miles out of town, and they love it initially, but then after a while, it becomes a real drag having to commute it. You'd have to like plan your day. It's not like being right in town where you can just run to the store and run back home. If you're going to do things in Santa Fe proper, you kind of plan your day because you can't be going back and forth. Yeah, although people from Chicago or bigger cities, it's not really that big a deal in terms of commuting, but after you've been here a while, it starts to grow old.
Well, it's interesting how quickly we become spoiled because areas like out in the northwest part of town or in El Dorado is a very short drive by most people's standards when they move to Santa Fe. They think it's so convenient and so close, but you're right. After about 5 years, they begin to realize, I don't have to spend 8 minutes in my car coming and going. I can actually live there where that's not something I have to do.
I think that's a good word. We're all spoiled because Santa Fe, I'm so grateful I came back. I was gone for 16 years. I lived in New York City. I am
Wow.
so glad I came home and I raised my kids here. Like you're saying, this is a great place to raise children. Um, Anything else you want to talk about in terms of the Santa Fe market or real estate or advice? If people are watching this, hopefully in California, they'll be picking up on this, or, different areas of the country, things they should, consider. And maybe it's not Santa Fe. I'm interviewing people in other parts of the state. What would you recommend for, like normal people? And of course, if you're super wealthy, you can live anywhere and have anything. But what would you recommend for regular folk? They still have jobs and kids and other financial worries. What would you recommend?
I think it's important to listen to your heart to figure out what is the right place to move to. Of course, the biggest component of that decision is typically employment. But the beauty now is that we have a lot more flexibility about where we can work and where we live with everybody, with so many people working off of their laptop computers. So my sense is get in and study and do your research and be prepared to make a decision, because unfortunately there's a lot of pressure on buyers trying to make a decision about where to buy and what house to buy. And when something comes on the market, you typically don't have very long to make a decision. So we don't care for those kind of pressure situations, but that's the reality of the market right now. So
And
we ask everybody to get really well informed so they're prepared to make decisions.
Well, and you mentioned working remotely. Now, again, this isn't like a big city, so there are areas, Santa Fe, Albuquerque, there are areas where, Wi-Fi works perfectly fine. But how do people, other areas, you go a little bit out of town and, the internet's not that good. So what do you recommend? What do you tell people about that? Or what should they do to find out if they have, if there's broadband service in an area they may be looking at?
Sure. Well, the typically the quickest, easiest, best solution is, do you have a Comcast connection? Um, there are many places outside of Santa Fe that do, but of course many that do not. The next best thing after that is probably a line of sight direction through NM Surf. They are a local internet provider who can provide high-speed access, but they need a visual line of sight to your location. So the bottom line is that it is something that you have to look at and understand carefully. And I think the best way to do it is find out what the neighbors' experiences are with the internet.
So that's good. And so would realtors advise that, or your realtors would say, I know that you're really liking that area, but I've talked to somebody else and it's really hard to get internet. I mean, are you upfront about some of the disadvantages of parts of Santa Fe County?
Oh, absolutely. The important thing is understanding the important issues that your client has, and then doing sufficient research to know that they've got enough information to make the right kind of decision that fits them.
Okay, so we're getting ready we're almost at the end of this interview here. Are you still actively selling, or are you just kind of like you're kind of just cracking the whip these days?
Well, sometimes it feels like I'm the one who has 75 bosses, but we work hard together in a very collaborative fashion. I occasionally get involved in a transaction, but for the most part, my job is helping to oversee what the agents are doing, dealing with special circumstances and issues that come up that may be a little bit challenging or a little bit complicated, coming up with negotiating strategies. So I will participate frequently with client meetings about reviewing an offer, the terms of the contract, how we need to improve this or just overcome some of the challenges that we face in trying to get a transaction closed.
Okay, well, good. Well, David Barker, Barker Realty, Santa Fe local. Go Demons! That was our old high school
Great.
team.
Oh, yes.
Listen, thank you for your time now, and I've already worked a little bit with Stephanie, one of your
Yes.
realtors, and I'd love to have other Barker realtors on the show here. So thank you so much, and we'll be in touch. How's that?
Terrific. Thank you so much, Anna.